Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You guys sent in a podcast episode called 15 Ways to Improve Self-Development. And wow, 15 ticks is a lot.
It is. It's like they say information overload.
Right, really. But don't worry, that's why we're here. We'll help break it all down and figure out which tips might be the best fit for you.
Exactly. No need to feel overwhelmed. It's all about finding what works for you.
So this podcast jumps right in and talks about the importance of setting clear goals. They even make this analogy about going on a road trip without a destination. Kind of makes sense, right? You'd just be driving around aimlessly.
Right. Makes you think about what you're really aiming for. It's not just about having any goal. It's about having one that really matters to you.
Yeah, it's like, what's your driving force? And then the podcast talks about this idea of having a growth mindset, which I've always found really interesting. It's that whole belief in your ability to learn and improve no matter what obstacles you face.
You know, it's not just about setting goals. It's about how you approach those goals. The podcast suggests that a growth mindset helps you reframe challenges. Instead of seeing them as failures, you see them as opportunities.
It's almost like a superpower, isn't it? The podcast even recommends this book, Mindset by Carol Dweck, to dive deeper. Maybe we should check that out.
Definitely adding that to my reading list. And, you know, the podcast brings up some interesting examples like Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Those guys are huge readers.
No kidding. I wonder what's on their reading list.
Right. Maybe we need to do a deep dive on that sometime. But seriously, I think it highlights just how important reading is for growth. You're exposed to so many new ideas and perspectives.
Yeah, it's like a workout for your brain. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, the podcast also stresses the importance of self-reflection, which I'll admit, sometimes I struggle with.
Oh, I get that. It's one of those things that's easier said than done. But, you know, self-reflection doesn't have to be about beating yourself up over past mistakes. It's more about stepping back and taking a look at your thoughts, your actions, and your patterns. Like, are they helping you or are they holding you back?
It's like taking inventory, right? Seeing what's working and what needs adjusting.
Exactly. And even though it can be a little uncomfortable at times, it can also be really eye-opening.
I remember this one time I was really struggling with briefly mentioned a personal challenge, and I was so stuck in my head about it, but then I finally took some time to really reflect, and I realized I was mentioning the root cause. And once I figured that out, I was able to mention the positive change you made.
Sometimes it's just about recognizing those patterns, right?
Totally. The podcast also talks about journaling as a great way to practice self-reflection, even just for a few minutes each day.
Yeah, even 10 to 15 minutes can make a difference. Like, what if you tried writing down a few thoughts at the end of each day? Just reflections on the day's challenges and any wins.
And things you're grateful for too, right?
Absolutely.
I'm it. Okay, now get this. The podcast says we should reframe failure as a teacher. I love that. We tend to see failure as this like end point, but really it's just part of the process.
All about perspective, right?
Yeah.
What if we looked at failure as valuable data? Like, what can I learn from this? How can I adjust my approach?
Yeah, I think that's where real growth happens. The podcast uses this example of, like, not getting a job you really wanted. It's easy to feel defeated, but what if you took a step back and analyzed what happened during the interview? Maybe there are some things you could improve for next time.
That's such a great point. And, you know, this actually leads right into the next topic. Emotional intelligence, or EQ as they call it.
EQ, huh? Yeah, I've heard that term before, but
it's about being aware of and managing your own emotions, but also understanding and empathizing with the emotions of others.
It sounds like this superpower you can develop.
Kind of, yeah. I think the podcast mentioned it can help with things like communication, relationships, and even conflict resolution.
It seems like EQ would be a really valuable skill to have, that's for sure. The podcast talked about active listening as a way to improve EQ. Like, are you really paying attention when someone's talking to you? Are you trying to understand their perspective?
I think that's a great place to start. We could all use a little more active listening in our lives. What about you? Any situations coming up where you could really practice that?
That's a good question. I'll definitely be more mindful of that in my conversations today. Speaking of mindfulness, the podcast really emphasizes the power of building positive habits. And it's not about trying to change everything overnight. It's about those little actions you do consistently over time.
Yeah, it's about progress, not perfection.
Right, totally. So what's one small habit you could start today to get a little closer to your goals? It could be anything like drinking more water, taking a walk during your lunch break, or even just setting aside a few minutes each day to read.
Those are all great ideas. And to help you stay consistent, the podcast suggests using a habit tracker. It's a good way to visually see your progress.
Love that. Okay, there's this quote from the podcast that really stuck with me. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Kind of makes you stop and think, huh.
It does. Makes you think about the people you surround yourself with. Are they supporting your growth? Inspiring you?
Yeah, are they helping you become the best version of yourself? The podcast even suggests joining communities or groups that are focused on growth and learning.
Yeah, being around like-minded people can be really powerful. Since you're interested in mention the listener's known interest, have you ever thought about joining a community or group related to that interest?
That's a great idea. I might have to check that out. Okay, so this next point is all about learning new skills, which in today's world is more important than ever.
It's true. The world is changing so fast. The skills that were valuable even just a few years ago might be completely different now.
The podcast actually mentions some awesome online learning platforms like YouTube, Coursera, and Skillshare.
It seems like you can learn just about anything online these days.
I know. It's incredible. I've been thinking about taking a topic course. Have you ever taken any online courses?
I haven't, but I've heard great things. Maybe we should try one together.
I'm in. Okay, so this next point is all about stepping outside of our comfort zones. The podcast says nothing grows in your comfort zone, which I think is so true.
It's all about taking those calculated risks, right? Like, what's one small step you could take to challenge yourself?
Yeah.
Maybe it's volunteering for a new project at work, having a difficult conversation you've been putting off, or even just trying a new hobby.
It's all about those small steps that help us grow, right? What about you? Anything you're thinking of trying?
Well, public speaking has always been a fear of mine, so maybe I'll look for opportunities to practice that.
That's awesome. Those small acts of courage can sometimes lead to the biggest breakthroughs.
You're absolutely right.
All right, time for a little introspection. The podcast talks about the power of keeping a gratitude journal. Have you ever tried that?
I have. There's something really powerful about writing down the things you're grateful for each day. It's like a little mood booster.
I've heard about it, but I've never actually stuck with it. What's the science behind it? Why does it work?
Well, studies have shown that focusing on gratitude can actually rewire your brain to be more positive. It can reduce stress, boost happiness, and even improve your health.
No kidding. I'm definitely going to give it a try. What about you? Think you'll start journaling again?
Definitely. Let's make a pact to try for a week and see how we feel. We can even compare notes.
Deal. Okay, let's move on to something that's always on my mind. Time management. The podcast presents it as a crucial skill for personal growth, and I couldn't agree more. I feel like I'm constantly trying to squeeze more hours out of the day.
I think we all feel that way sometimes. But the podcast suggests that it's not just about managing to-do lists. It's about recognizing that time is our most valuable resource.
I like that. It's about being intentional with how we spend our time, right?
Exactly. The podcast mentions some helpful tools and techniques like Google Calendar and something called the Pomodoro technique.
I've heard of the Pomodoro technique. Isn't that where you work in focused intervals?
Yeah, something like that. It's about breaking down work into manageable chunks with short breaks in between. Supposed to be really good for productivity.
Interesting. We should definitely look into that. Sometimes I think my biggest issue isn't time management, it's focus. Like, I can have all the time in the world, but if I'm not focused, I don't get anything done. I wonder if there are any tips for improving focus.
That's a great point. We should
Yeah.
definitely explore that further. You know what? Maybe we can make that the focus of our next deep dive.
Perfect. I'm always up for learning new ways to boost my focus.
Okay, so back to the podcast. The next topic they cover is feedback, which can be a really powerful tool for growth.
It's true, although it's not always easy to hear.
That's for sure. But what if we tried to reframe feedback as a gift? It's a chance to see ourselves from a different perspective and identify our blind spots. The podcast talks about actively seeking out feedback from people you trust.
That's a good idea, but I think a lot of people are afraid to ask for feedback because they don't want to be judged.
I totally get that. But what if we approached it with a sense of curiosity? A genuine desire to learn and grow. The people who care about us will want to support us.
That's a great perspective. I'm going to challenge myself to be more open to feedback, even if it feels a little uncomfortable at first. So this next topic is something I've been wanting to explore more deeply: mindfulness.
The podcast specifically focuses on meditation as a path to mindfulness, but I think the concept is much broader than that. It's about being present in each moment.
I love that. It makes it seem less intimidating, more accessible. Like, we can practice mindfulness in everyday life, not just during formal meditation. Although the podcast did recommend some popular meditation apps like Headspace and Calm, which could be good for beginners.
Oh, yeah, those are great. Have you ever tried either of those?
I haven't, but I've heard good things. But even if you're not into guided meditation, there's still plenty of ways to be more mindful throughout your day.
Exactly. Like, even something as simple as drinking a cup of tea can be a mindful experience. Instead of just gulping it down, what if you really savored each sip? Or how about taking a walk without your phone and really paying attention to your surroundings?
I love that. Such simple but powerful ways to bring more mindfulness into our lives. Okay, last but not least, the podcast wraps up by reminding us to celebrate our wins, both big and small.
It's so important to acknowledge our accomplishments. We tend to get so caught up in striving for the next thing that we forget to appreciate how far we've come.
I know, I'm totally guilty of that. The podcast even suggests some fun ways to celebrate, like treating yourself to a nice dinner, taking a day off, or spending time with loved ones. It's about giving ourselves permission to enjoy the journey.
Exactly. And it's not about being self-indulgent. It's about recognizing our efforts and giving ourselves that positive reinforcement. It's like a little pat on the back.
Absolutely. And it's funny, the podcast ends by saying that willpower is like a muscle. It gets stronger with practice.
Makes sense, right? The more we practice self-discipline, the better we get at it.
I like that analogy. So it's okay to slip up sometimes. We're all human. The important thing is to keep practicing and keep learning. Wow, we've covered so much ground.
We have. This podcast was jam-packed with great insights.
It really was. But remember, it's not about trying to do everything at once. Pick a few things that resonate with you and focus on those. What are you most excited to try?
That's a great question, and it's something I encourage everyone listening to consider. What are you ready to implement today? All right, welcome back. You ready to keep exploring? We've got more awesome resources to dive into.
I am. Hit me with it.
Okay, so this next one you sent, it's an article called The Science of Self-Discipline.
Oh yeah, that one was really interesting. It kind of gets into the psychology behind willpower and self-control.
It does, and it challenges this idea that willpower is this limited resource. Instead it says willpower is more like a muscle. You can actually train it and make it stronger.
So it's not that we run out of willpower, it's just that we haven't necessarily learned how to use it effectively.
Exactly. And the article talks about a bunch of different research studies that look at ways to improve self-discipline. And one thing that really resonated with me is the importance of having a clear intention and an action plan. Like, what are you trying to achieve? And what specific steps are you going to take to get there?
That totally connects with what we talked about earlier with setting those clear goals. You need a roadmap, not just a vague idea of where you want to go.
Totally. And then the article brought up this thing called environmental design, which basically means setting up your surroundings in a way that makes it easier to make good choices.
Ooh, I like that. So instead of relying just on willpower, you're creating an environment that actually supports your goals.
Right. Like if you're trying to eat healthier, maybe get rid of all the junk food in your pantry. Or if you're trying to be more productive, you set up a dedicated workspace where you won't get distracted.
Oh.
What about you? Any changes you could make to your environment?
Oh, for sure. My desk could definitely use some decluttering. It seems like a magnet for clutter.
We've all been there. Sometimes just clearing the clutter can clear the mind too,
Totally agree.
The article also emphasized the importance of managing stress and getting enough sleep. It turns out when you're stressed or sleep deprived, your willpower takes a major hit.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that. Like when I'm tired and overwhelmed, it's so much harder to resist temptation.
Makes total sense.
Self-care isn't selfish, it's actually essential.
Couldn't agree more. And this next point really resonated with me, the importance of accountability. Having someone to share your goals with, someone to track your progress. It makes a huge difference.
It's like having a built-in cheerleader, someone to keep you motivated when you're struggling.
Exactly. Sometimes just knowing that someone's checking in on you can be enough to keep you on track. It could be a friend, a family member, a mentor, anyone you trust. Think about who you could reach out to for support.
That's a great question. Okay, I'm ready for the next one. What's up next?
All right, so this next resource you shared, it's a TED Talk titled The Power of Habit. Have you ever seen it?
I've heard of it, but I haven't actually watched it.
Oh, it's so good. It really delves into the science behind habit formation, like how we can actually rewire our brains to create new habits.
So it's not just about willpower, it's like an actual neurological process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the main points of the talk is this idea of a habit loop. It's a 3-step process: cue, routine, reward.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that look like in real life?
So let's say you're trying to develop a habit of exercising every morning. The cue could be something like setting out your workout clothes the night before. That's your visual reminder. The routine is, well, actually working out. And the reward could be that feeling of accomplishment you get afterwards. Or maybe you treat yourself to a healthy breakfast.
Got it. So the reward helps reinforce the habit, and the cue is what kind of triggers you to get started.
Exactly. The TED Talk also talks about how important it is to start small. Don't try to change everything at once, just focus on building one new habit at a time. Think about one tiny habit you could start today. What would it be?
I'm gonna try making my bed every morning. It seems so simple, but I bet it'll make me feel more productive throughout the day.
Love it. Small changes, big impact. The talk also mentions this concept of keystone habits. These are habits that, once you've established them, they kind of have this ripple effect on other areas of your life.
Interesting. Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so think about exercise. Obviously, it's good for your physical health, but it can also improve your sleep, give you more energy, and even boost your mood. And those positive changes can then spill over into other areas of your life, like how you perform at work or your relationships.
Wow, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. So by focusing on building just a few key habits, you can actually create a cascade of positive changes.
That's pretty cool. All right, I think we have time for one more, right?
We do. And this one's a good one. It's a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh yeah, I heard great things.
It's awesome. It's full of practical advice on building good habits and breaking bad ones.
Sounds right up our alley.
So Clear lays out these 4 laws of behavior change. He says to make a habit stick, you need to make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
I love that. It's so actionable. So to make a habit obvious, you might put a visual reminder somewhere you'll see it. To make it attractive, maybe you pair it with something you enjoy. To make the easy, break it down into small steps. And to make it satisfying, you reward yourself.
You got it. And he also talks about the importance of tracking your progress and celebrating those wins.
It all ties back to those ideas of accountability and positive reinforcement.
Totally. We need those little wins to keep us going.
Okay, so we've explored all these amazing resources today, and I have to say, I'm feeling super inspired.
Me too. We've learned so much about setting goals, building habits, cultivating a growth mindset, and so much more.
It's like a crash course in how to level up our lives.
It is.
Yeah.
But remember, it's not about trying to do everything at once. It's about choosing those strategies that really resonate with you and creating a personalized self-development plan.
Exactly. And as you're thinking about that, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll dive into some specific action steps you can take to start implementing all this awesome knowledge and truly unlock your potential. And we're back. Okay, so after all that amazing information, my brain is buzzing. I'm ready to actually put some of these ideas into practice.
That's what it's all about, taking action. But yeah, I know what you mean. It can be a lot to process.
It can. So where do we even begin?
Well, remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Just pick one thing, one small step that you can take today to move toward your goals.
Yeah, that's good advice. It could be something small like setting aside some time for reading, or finally trying that active listening thing, or even just writing down a few things you're grateful for before bed. It all adds up.
It really does. And don't forget what we were talking about earlier, your environment. Take a look around. Is your environment set up in a way that actually supports your goals?
That's such a good reminder. Sometimes it's those little things that make a big difference.
Right. Like if you're trying to eat healthier, maybe you meal prep on Sundays so you don't reach for those takeout menus during the week.
Genius. Or like we were talking about decluttering our desks. That could be a game changer for focus. What about you? Any environmental changes you're going to try?
I was thinking about setting up a little reading nook, like a dedicated space just for reading. I think it would make me more likely to actually pick up a book and relax.
I love that idea. A little sanctuary for reading. I might have to steal that.
Steal away. Remember that habit loop we talked about? Cue, routine, reward. If you're trying to make a new habit stick, those are your key ingredients.
Okay, so remind me how that works again.
Let's say you want to start meditating, but you have trouble sticking with it. The cue could be like putting your meditation cushion in a spot where you'll see it every day. The routine is, well, actually meditating. And the reward could be something enjoyable, like a cup of herbal tea afterwards.
Oh, I like that. So you're basically setting yourself up for success by making it easy and enjoyable. Okay, and how about accountability? We were saying how important it is to have someone to share your goals with, someone to keep you motivated.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. It doesn't have to be anything formal. Just having someone to check in with, to share your progress and your struggles, it's like having a cheerleader on the sidelines.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about celebrating those wins.
Oh yes, celebrate all the wins, big or small. Give yourself credit for all the effort you're putting in.
Those little celebrations help us stay motivated and on track. And don't forget, willpower is a muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it.
Right. So if you slip up, don't beat yourself up about it. It's all part of the process.
I love that. This whole deep dive has been so amazing. I feel like we've uncovered so many gems.
We have. But now comes the really important part, putting all this knowledge into action.
So here's our challenge to everyone listening. Pick one thing, just one, that really spoke to you today, and commit to trying it.
One small step. That's all it takes to start moving in the right direction.
You never know where that one step might lead you. Remember, personal growth is a journey, not a destination. So enjoy the ride.
And never stop learning and growing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep shining